what can help him. All right, let's get started. As I mentioned, we have a lot to talk about today. So the goal of the workshop is to explain you really end-to-end how to build a plugin in Strapi. Since V4, we made a lot of improvements. You may have already seen some of the API updates we have done. We improved the plugin API, the admin, and the server ones to make sure that it was easier and easier to extend Strapi with plugins, for instance. So today it's going to be Rémi, software engineer, and myself, Raf, product designer. We both work at Strappy and more specifically in the expansion squad. And our goal is to build a thriving ecosystem around Strappy. And that means mainly plugins at this point, but as you may have seen yesterday, custom fields and other things are coming to make Strappy even more customizable, even more useful for all your use cases. And so the goal today is really to empower you to use all the tools we put together for you to build your plugins and to basically help on your own use cases. If there are some specific things you want to do, Strappy can't do it right now. We want you to kind of jump ahead and build what you need. So the way to go about it is in three parts. First, I'll kind of introduce how to think about a plugin on the design side, how to make sure that it aligns to the guidelines we put together and the design system we now have, and that you can use as well to make sure that it really integrates seamlessly into Strappy core. And then Rémi will talk more about how to actually make it happen, how to build it. And we're going to look at the backend side and then the front end side. And at the end, because I'm sure we'll end up building a great plugin, super useful, we want to know how to actually share it. And as you may know, we now have a web marketplace and since yesterday, an in-app marketplace as well. So now is a great time to share your plugins with the community. So we'll kind of look a little bit more about the details on how to do that. So let's jump into the designs. So what are we going to build today? It would be a very short workshop if we did like a simple hello world. So we went a little bit beyond that and we thought, okay, what do we actually need? What would be cool to build for us and the community and kind of show as well all the possibilities with the plugins. And a to-do is actually a great example, we figured. And so that's what we'll try to build today. And we'll see a little bit more in details the designs. We'll also look at the Strappy design system. As I mentioned, we put a lot of documentation together so that you have all the information you need to make better decisions to create like a plugin that really fits into Strappy. And we also put together a UI kit as part of the design system, and you can find it in Figma, and it contains all the components, all the design tokens you'll need to build your plugin, or even beyond. If you want to customize some screens of Strappy, you can do it right there just to get a sense of what it will look like. And we use the UI kit today as well. And you'll see it's so flexible. It's super easy. You don't need to customize too much of it. So it's pretty neat. All right. So first of all, let's look at what we're going to build today. So we have here, we are in the content manager where we have a restaurant as an entity, and you have the sidebar here, and you can see here this new card. So it's been injected in what we call an zone, and these zones are customizations. And here we're gonna make a heavy use of it. So we have first the empty state, and then super easy to add a to-do. You just click here, and then you have this modal where you can enter what you actually want to do. And then you have it here. You can edit it if you want. In this case, I figured let's add an emoji. For instance, here it's something that a designer might look at. So if you're collaborating with the team, it's easier. I mean, and just in general, emojis are so nice. And this is it. And here you can see how the plugin would look like if you have many more to-dos, and potentially you could have a collapse or expand option to kind of see more or less of these to-dos. So that's as simple as that. And to really understand what are the components we'll use. So I put this Figma file together and I'll make sure to share it with you all so that you can have a look afterwards. So in terms of details of the components, so as I mentioned, this card is in an injection zone that's been predefined, and you can find it in the documentation. Then more details about the card. I tried to kind of write down some component that you'll find in the design system. So for instance, typography, here you have the pie size, and you can find it here. So here I'm on Strapi design system website, and you have the typography and you have all the details, even though you won't need it so much because everything is already available. But at least you know that it's there, and you have more explanation about where to use some typographies. And then, sorry. Okay. And then you have some specific components like the text button here. And then the only really custom component we'll build is the to-do here. And you can see that basically it's a checkbox on the default state. And then on the complete state, what we did was to add a custom strike through on the body typography. So it's called Omega, just to give it more like this completion feel. And then on the hover stage, you have two icon buttons. Here they are slightly smaller than the ones provided on the design system, but in any case, they are there for you to use. And the last main component we'll look at today is the model. And actually all these what seems complex component comes for free in the design system, and you'll see how easy it is for Rémi, not only because he's an expert, but just because the design system has been so well done. You basically just need to add, in this case, a text input, which is also a component available. So basically, I'm sure you're starting to understand my points. A lot of what you'll need is already integrated, so you won't have to figure out on the front end side what you need to build, how you need to build. And we'll see that when you want to share your plugin on the marketplace, it's going to be way easier for us to review it, to verify your plugin, because you kind of follow by default the guidelines we put together. So that's for the anatomy. And maybe the last thing I want to show is the storybook we have for all the components, and Rémi will make a heavy use of it. And in this case, you see the buttons, and so you have like all the different variants, and you can play with the different states, and you have the documentation if my computer wants it's doing it, but basically you have access to this website. I'll make sure to share the links in the comments. So that's it for me on the design side, and now it's time for Rémi to make it happen.
All right, well, thank you, Raf, for introducing us to this very lovely plugin. And now I will do my best to implement it as closely as possible to your designs. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen. So Raf, please let me know if it is indeed working correctly.
Yeah, it's working well.
All right, well, thank you. And let me just hide the Zoom control so I have access to all of my screen. All right, now we're talking and we can get started. So first of all, before I start building this plugin, I want to let you know and that all of the code that we write together during this workshop will be available on a public GitHub repository. So no need to worry about that. And also not everything will be 100% live coded because, well, it would be very challenging because we only have an hour together. All right, that being said, let's get started. So the first thing you need to start building a custom plugin is to have a running Strapi application in development. And that's exactly what I have prepared. You can see my app is running on the usual port, and I've created it using the corporate template, which is why I already have some content type like this one and some data already, which is very convenient for development. And now that we have this application, I also have a VS Code window with all of the code for my Strapi application and the terminal running as well to run my Strapi server. So I'm going to stop my Strapi server and to run the first command for today, which is the generator command that we'll use to create a plugin. So let's say yarn Strapi generate, because I'm using John. And this is an interactive CLI that we can use to create different pieces of a Strapi application. But in our case, what we need is to create a plugin. And we're going to name our plugin quite simply to do. And now the CLI lets us know that it has created a bunch of files for us, but also that the plugin is not enabled by default. So we need to do that manually. So luckily, the generator provides a snippet that we can copy and that we'll need to paste in a configuration file called config/plugins.js. So that's what we'll do. So let's look for this file, and we can see in our config folder that we have no plugins.js file, and that's normal because Strapi applications do not have that file by default. But it's not a problem because we can simply create it ourselves, and let's paste the snippet that was provided to us. Now this time, if I restart my Strapi application, hopefully I shouldn't have any errors, and this time the plugin should be running. And you can see that we've got no errors whatsoever, so we can move forward. So let's take a look at the code that was created for us by the generator. So our plugins code is located in the src directory inside of plugins and to do, so the name of my plugin. So this to do folder holds all of the code for my plugin. And it has the two mandatory files for the plugin API, which is Strapi admin, which is the entry point for all of the front-end behavior of your plugin, as well as Strapi server, which is the entry point for all of the backend part of the plugin. And the generator also created an opinionated file structure that creates a lot of boilerplate for us to allow us to get started quickly with both the front end with this admin folder, as well as the backend with the server folder. So now we have a running Strapi application, as well as a fully prepared NT plugin. So we can start thinking about how we actually want to implement this plugin based on Raf's design. So let's go back to Raf's Figma file, and we'll start wondering about how we can actually implement it. So first of all, let's wonder how we can actually store the content for our plugin in the database, because we'll need to persist the content and therefore to store it in a database. So you can see that for every to-do card, we have a list of tasks that can be checked or not, and that have some content. So for each of these tasks, to store each of these tasks, we're going to create a task collection type in Strapi. And then we'll need to find a way to attach a task to an entry in Strapi. Because, for example, here, if on this view we create a task, then this to-do will only be related to this ramen restaurant. And so we need a way to store this relationship. And to do this, well, obviously, we need to use a relationship in Strapi. But here, it's not a very simple relationship because a to-do can be linked to a restaurant, but it can also be linked to a like, it can be linked to a review, or really to any content type. So any collection type or any single type. And to do this, we can use a Strapi feature, which is called polymorphic relations. So relations that can be linked to several content types, so to several tables in the database. So let's first create our content type for task, and then we'll see how we can attach it to any collection type. So to create a collection type, so first I'm going to close my terminal. We can see that in the server directory that was created for us, we already have a content types folder with an entry file. And here we can export an object which will contain all of the different content types that our plugin can export. So in our case, we can add a property which will be called task, and we need to pass it a schema, which will be a schema object. And for this object, I'm going to write it in a dedicated file. So let's say task.js. And this is a file where I'll configure all of the schema for my content type. So I have prepared a snippet to avoid wasting time on this schema. And you can see that here, this format, you're probably familiar with this format if you're a Strapi user, because this schema is exactly the same as any schema JSON file that would be generated by the Strapi content type builder. So I've got all of the information about database, display names, etc. We're turning off draft and publish, and we want to make sure that the plugin is not visible in the content types builder. Then we have the attributes object, which is where we can configure all of the different properties for our content type. So here we have created a name field, which holds the actual content for our to-do. So for example, here, name would be quite simply text. We've got an isDone Boolean, which is whether or not the task has been completed. And we also have the related key, which is a relationship to any collection type. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a polymorphic relation. And it's a polymorphic relation that should be linked to only one single content type. And for this, we say morph to one in Strapi as the relationship type. Okay, so now I need to import this schema and to export it from the content types file. So let's say task, and VS Code auto imports the task for me. So if I also save the task file and I restart my application, now hopefully the content type should be enabled and detected by Strapi. But to make sure of that, what I can do is to shut down the Strapi server and to restart it using the console command. So let's say yarn Strapi console. And what this does is that it creates a regular Strapi server running on the usual address, but it also enables an interactive console where I can write some JavaScript command. And this is quite powerful because in this console, I have access to the global Strapi variable. So in the Strapi variable, I can say strapi.contenttypes, and this holds a huge object with all of my content types. But in my case, I will directly look for the specific content type that I created. So I'll say strapi.contenttype singular, and I need to pass it the unique identifier for my content type. So in this case, it's plugin : because this is a content type that wasn't created by the user, but rather by our plugin, then the name of the plugin, so to do, and the name of the collection type, so task. And now if I enter, I can see that all of the configuration that I wrote in my schema is indeed available in Strapi. So this is working perfectly fine. But now, again, as you mentioned, as you may remember, we need to have a two-way relationship between the task and the collection type. Because here, we only have a relationship from one way. When we fetch a to-do, we can know what content type and what entry it's related to. But what we also want is to, from an entry, to fetch the related to-dos. So to do this, we need to create a relationship on every single content type and to link it to several to-dos, to several tasks, sorry. Now, obviously, we don't want to ask users to go into the content type builder and to manually create the relationship for all of their content types, because that would be a terrible experience. But instead, what we can do is to programmatically create this new relationship. So to do this, we're going to hook into the register phase of the Strapi application, which is a phase of the lifecycle of my Strapi application. And this is a function that runs just before the application is actually started. And that's the perfect place where we can modify the existing collection types. So here we have access to an object called Strapi.content types, which is exactly the object that we logged in the console earlier. And what we'll do is that we'll loop on every single content type, and then we'll mutate the content types to add a new field, which is a relationship. So I have prepared a small snippet to get me started with this. So let's copy it. And so since Strapi.content types is an object, I am looping on the values of this object. And then for every single content type, I am adding a new key to the attribute object. And this new key is a relation. It's a polymorphic relation, but this time it's linked to many tasks because one entry can have several to-dos related. And we are pointing to the right collection type, which is to-do.task. And then one thing that is very important is that we make this field private because we do not want tasks to be exposed in the content API. We don't want end users of our applications to know about the tasks that we, the Strapi administrators, have created for ourselves. But you may wonder then how we can actually fetch these task data if it is not returned by the API, because in a few moments, when we'll start working on the front end, we'll need to be able to make an API call to fetch the related tasks from an entry. And the way we'll do that is that instead of using the content API, the traditional content API, we will use the content manager's API. But I'm not going to spoil it too much because that's what we'll look at in a few moments when you get started with the front end. So now, just like earlier, we want to make sure that our modification has actually worked. So I'm going to close my Strapi server and to restart it. And this time I'm going to log the Strapi.content type subject again, so which returns every single content type. And I'm going to check if, for example, this last content type, which is my page content type, indeed has the task attribute. So in my attribute object, I can see that, yes, I do have a task key, which is an array of objects, which is exactly what we want. So this modification was successful. Now, so this is the end of the backend section of this workshop. So we were able to create a new content type, and we were also able to link this content type with a polymorphic relationship to any other content type, thanks to the register phase. Now, if you want to learn about how you can create custom routes for your plugins, like using routers, controllers, and services, we won't be covering that today because, again, we'll use the Content Manager's API instead. But I encourage you to watch the replay of Richard's workshop, which will have all of that covered perfectly well. And now, Raf, do you know if we have any questions about the backend part before I move on?
No, there's just a typo apparently in the register.js file in configuration, but yeah, I mean the last line configurable.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Definitely.
I appreciate it. But otherwise, yeah, no question. I'm assuming it was super clear. At least for me, it was.
Well, thanks. And I'll make sure to correct this typo in the full repo that I'll be sharing with you. Okay, well then, if there are no questions, then I can shut down my server and we'll start looking at the front end of our plugin. So let's go back again to the Figma file so that we can decide what we need to implement. So the first thing we'll need to do is to figure out how we can create our custom React component and make sure that it appears on the Strapi admin panel. And for this, the solution has already been provided by Raf actually, which is that we want to use an injection zone. So Strapi has an injection zone built in the content manager at just the right place for this. So it's inside the content manager in the edit view, because this is the view where we edit some entries. And it's going to be right by the links on the right panel. So this is the injection zone called right links. All right, so we know the first step that we need to implement to build the front end of our plugin. So now I'm going to restart my Strapi server, but this time I need to add the watch admin flag. And what this does is that it runs both the front end and the back end in development mode. Because when you run just Strapi develop, only the backend will get refreshed when you make changes to the backend. So when you start making changes to the admin panel of your Strapi application, you need to add this flag, because otherwise the changes you make on the front end will not be reflected when you refresh the page. So this creates the Strapi application on a different port 8000, but it should behave exactly the same otherwise. And so now I'm going to open the edit view of any content type, for example, the global single type. And we can see that this is the place where we want to add a new component. All right, so let's build the injection zone that we talked about. I'm going to close the server part of my plugins code, and I'm going to expand the admin folder. So to register an injection zone, I'm going to open the index file of my admin directory, which is where I can do a lot of configuration about the front end of my plugin. And the place where you need to create some injection zones is in the Bootstrap lifecycle of your front end application. So inside of this Bootstrap, we're going to create the injection zone. So I'm going to copy the snippet. And you can see that we are taking the application variable and injecting a component using a method that is provided to us. And then we're saying that inside of the edit view page on this injection zone, so the right links, I'm going to create a component. So this is a unique identifier for my component. And then finally, we can provide the actual component. So for now, to make sure it works, I'm going to create kind of a silly React component, which is one that just returns a string. So let's say my component here. And I'll save it, make sure everything works, looks like it. And we can see that indeed it does appear on screen. So this is great news. But instead of returning like any silly string, we want to return an actual React component here, obviously. So to do this, I'm going to create a new file for my component in the components folder. And I will call it to-do card, which is a JavaScript file. So this is the component that's going to hold the card that we could see on Figma. That holds this card that contains all of the to-dos and all of the tasks. And since it can take quite a bit of time to create a fully custom React component that perfectly implements the design system, I created a snippet for this. So for now, I'm just going to save it. And we will look in just a moment into the code to see how it actually works. So let's import my component from the injection zone. So let's say to-do card, and VS Code lets us import the file automatically. So let's save both files and see what this snippet was able to create. All right, so we now have a beautiful to-dos box. So everything seems to work fine. And I can then walk you folks through the code of my to-do card. So first of all, let's take a look at what the component actually returns. So you can see that the main component is a box component. And I was able to determine that it would be a box component because, well, Raf already did a lot of work for me by letting me know that this would be a box component in the design system. And also I was able to find all of the right props for this component, like all of the padding properties, because they are fully documented on the Storybook design system. So here, if I look up my box component, here I've got a simple example, but I can open the docs tab. And here I've got a quite complete documentation for my box component, and including a table with all of the props that you can pass it. So that's how I was able to know how I could configure all of the different paddings, the different backgrounds, the radius, etc. Then I also implemented, just like Raf had configured, and he's using the UI kit, a typography component with the right variants that I was able to find on Figma. And then I'm using a custom function that will return the right content inside of my box based on the state of my component. So if it is loading, then I got a loading state, an error state, an empty state. And finally, when everything is working, I'm taking my tasks array, and for each task, I'm displaying a checkbox using this component from the design system with the name of the to-do. So here you can see I'm making some quite extensive use of the design system. I'm importing all of these files from the @strappy/design system package, which is where you'll find all of the components on NPM to build your Strappy plugins. But you may wonder, like here, where do the tasks actually come from? So I will move back a little bit and show you how the logic of my component actually works. So here I have created a custom hook called useRelatedTasks that holds all of the data fetching logic for my component. And it returns the status of the request to fetch the different tasks, as well as a task array and a function that allows me to manually retrigger this data fetching. So let's look at how this custom hook was created. All right, so you can see the heart of my custom hook is this API call, where I'm calling the Content Manager API, and I'm fetching a lot of metadata to compute the right URL for this API call. So here, since I am on the page collection type, for example, here I'm going to fetch /content manager /collection types, because page is a collection type, /the slug, which is the unique identifier of my content type. In this case, /API : page.page. And finally, I'm fetching the ID. And I'm able to have all of this contextual information thanks to the use content manager edit view data manager custom hook, which is much easier to use than it is to pronounce. So this hook comes from the Strappy helper plugin, and it's fully documented on the Strappy documentation on docs.strappy.io. And you can see that it can return so many pieces of information. But in our case, what we use is the initial data, which is an object that holds all of my entries content as it was stored in the database, a Boolean that lets us know whether it's a collection type or a single type, and finally the slug, which is again the unique identifier of the content type. Okay, so we now know how we can fetch the actual information. And the rest of the hook is some pretty standard React logic. So I'm using React state for both the status of my request, as well as to store the actual results. And then I'm storing these results once the request has resolved. And you can see here that I'm making sure that I populate the task field, because, well, this is the information that I actually want. I'm only fetching this entries data because I want to find out the related tasks that I'll attach to it. Okay, so now that we know how we are able to actually fetch the data and to display it in a list in our component, let's look at the next step may look like. Oh yeah, I opened the wrong tab because I need to be under port 8000. Okay, so here I find it a little bit frustrating because we are able to list the different to-dos, but we haven't created any yet, so it's not visible to us. So let's fix this by adding the behavior that lets us create a to-do. So let's see what happens if I add a to-do here. And you can see that so far it's not really working. I only have a placeholder because I have already prepared the logic to decide whether or not the model should be shown. And to do this, I have created a Boolean variable using React state that decides whether or not the create model should be shown. And when it is, then I am displaying this paragraph. So instead of this silly paragraph, I'm going to create a new component that will hold some proper code to let us implement the model. So for this, I have prepared another piece of code. So let's copy it, and I will create a new component called create task model.js. And let's save it, and let's import it here instead of this paragraph. So let's say create task model, and again, it's been auto-imported for us. Now this time, before we use it, we'll take a look at how it was implemented. So here, if I start by focusing on what the model actually returns on screen, you can see that it returns a bunch of components related to the model. So I've got a model layout, which is the wrapper around everything, as well as a header, a model body, and a model footer. So you may wonder, like, how can we keep track of so many components when we want to implement a simple model? And the solution for this is, as quite often, to use the Storybook for the design system. Because here, if you look up a model, you can see that the example that is provided to us is super similar to what we actually want. Because what we want is to have this simple header, body, and footer with a simple form inside of it, which is almost the same thing as what is provided to us in the example. And you can see how this was implemented by clicking on the shortcut button. And so to build this component, I used this example from the Storybook as a starting point. And it's an approach that I encourage you to take to save time while developing Strappy plugins. Okay, so now let's save these files. And let's try to see what our model looks like. And first of all, whether it appears. All right, so we do have a model. I've got my form here, but let's see what happens when I try to close the model. And you can see that when I click, well, nothing happens. And that's because on the model layout component, I need to have a function that allows us to close the model. So this function is coming from the props of my create task model component. So I need to pass this prop when I am actually using the component. So let's say handle close, and this should be a component, a function that closes the model. So I'm going to write a simple function that changes this state variable to false by saying state create model is shown to false. Now let's save. And we'll try to open and then close our model. So here I can open it and I can close it as well, whether I click on the X arrow or on the console button, or if I just simply hit the escape key on my keyboard. Because by using the design system, your code will be fully accessible by default. Okay, so now we'll take a look at how we can actually submit this form and save our task in the database. So for this, I'll go back to the create task model component. And you can see that here, the wrapper, the model layout component, has been assigned to a form component with the as prop provided by React. And so when this form is submitted, this handle submit function is called. So let's take a look at how it was defined. So here, I've got quite a bit of data fetching logic, which is similar to the one in the previous file, where we were able to see how we could fetch some content. But this time we are posting some content because we want to create a new task entry. So to do this, we are using the Axios instance again to call the content manager API route. And we already know this time that it will always be a collection type called plugin : to do.task. And then the second argument that we pass to Axios is the object that we want to create. So in this case, we are passing it the name variable, which comes from the React state and which holds the content of our field. And we are setting the isDone property to false, and we are also creating the relationship. So this is quite interesting. This is the way that you can create a polymorphic relationship using the API. So instead of directly passing the ID of your relationship, you need to pass it an object with a type property, which will be the unique identifier of the related content type, and then the ID of the related content type. And just like earlier, these values are coming from our context hook, which is use_cm edit view data manager. And I also want to mention something I forgot earlier, is that we are using an Axios instance utility object here. And that's something that is provided by default when you use the plugin generator. And what it does is that for every single request, it's going to add an authorization header, which will pass your JSON web token along with your request. So that means that every request you make with this will be authenticated. And that's why we are able to successfully interact with the Content Manager API, even though it's a restricted API. Okay, so this being said, let's move forward. And you can see that again, I have a status piece of state where I can hold the status of my request, whether it's successful or it has failed or whether it's loading. And then once I have successfully created my post, then I will automatically close the model using the prop that we added together. All right, so let's try to actually submit something and see if it works. So I'm going to say to do, and I will save it. And you can see that we don't have any errors. So it seems to be working, but at the same time, we don't have anything there. But we can see that if we refresh the page, this time our to-do does appear. And that's because, well, first of all, it was successfully created, like it does exist in our Strappy database. But here, when we create something, it simply it simply doesn't update the state. So as you can remember, we had in the to-do card component a task array. This piece of state is simply not refreshed, so it becomes obsolete once we create a new entry. And the way that we want to fix this is that we'll need to actually refresh that piece of state by calling the refresh task function. So we need to call this function from our handle submit just after the entry was created. So let's say update to-do card state, and we'll want to call the refresh task function. But it's not available yet, so we'll try to have access to it by passing it via the props of the component. So let's say refresh tasks. And just like for the handle clause, we will add it here to the props when we call the component. So let's say refetch tasks equal refetch task, quite simply. Now let's save this. And let's see what happens this time when I try to create a new to-do. So I'm going to say my first to-do, which is a lie because it's my second. But hey, this time it actually works. Like it was instantly added to the to-dos list. And by the way, you can see that these to-dos are only related to this global entry, because if I move to a different edit view, then I have no to-dos again. So let's say I create a to-do to say check SEO. It won't, like it's only applied to this specific entry. Okay, so this is pretty cool, but it's missing like the most satisfying part of any to-do list app, which is how you can complete your tasks. Because here, when I click on this, nothing happens. And I want to be able to check these tasks and to mark them as done. So to do this, we will add a click handler when you click on an individual to-do. And when that is triggered, we'll want to call an API endpoint to modify the to-do and to mark is done as true. So let's see how we can build this. So we need to go back to our to-do card component, and more specifically to the place where the checkbox is implemented. So you can see that in the design system, the checkbox comes with a prop that is called onValueChange. And what this expects is a function that can take is checked as an argument. So whether or not the checkbox is checked, and then you can use it to do whatever custom logic you want. So let's say that we'll call a function called toggle task, and we'll pass it with is checked. Now this function doesn't exist yet, so I'm going to create it right now. So let's say const handle toggle, and it expects an argument called is checked. All right, so now we need to create our own API call, quite similar to how we were able to fetch the task and to how we were able to create a task over here. So I'm going to make my function asynchronous because I'm going to use some promises, and I'll call Axios instance. This time I will use the put method because that is how, using the content manager, you can edit an existing entry. And I say /content manager. And so this time we are only modifying a single task. So we know that it's going to be a collection type. So let's say collection types. And then we need to pass it the slug of the collection type we want to edit. So in our case, it will be plugin : to do that task. And then finally, we need to pass it the ID of the task. So here I need to pass a task ID variable, which doesn't exist yet. So I will add it to the arguments of my function. And I need to add it here as well when I actually call the function. So I can get the ID for the current task because I have access to the task variable. So I can do task.id. All right, so let's first of all save this. Oh no, I forgot a very important part, because here I only specified the address where I wanted to make the request, but I also need to make the actual update. So here for the second argument, which is the body of our request, you can pass an object with all the modifications that you want to make on this entry. And anything you do not pass to this object will not be modified in the database. So here, the only variable, the only property that I want to edit is the isDone. And so I will pass it isChecked, because that is the most recent state information I have about whether or not this task should be checked. All right, so I will refresh this again. And I'm going to open my DevTools to see whether the request was successfully made. And okay, it looks like we actually forgot something because nothing seemed to happen. Oh no, yeah, I actually have an error.
Yeah, there's the name of the handler. Thank you, Han, for your help.
All right, thank you for helping me. If I ever got stuck, that would suck. All right, so toggle task is not defined. And oh yeah, did I call it? Oh yeah, I called it toggle task. Handle. Okay, I will choose handle toggle. All right, so let's save it. Refresh it. I just wanted to make sure that you were paying attention, of course. And we'll do the check again, which is to open the networks tab, which I'm going to clear, and to click on a to-do and see what happens. And you can see that, yes, we did do a put request on /collection type /task /the ID, and it was a successful request. So this time when I refresh my application, then it is actually checked. But of course, I want it to appear instantly when I click on it. So to do this, I will do the same logic as I did when we created a new task, which is to call the refetch task function to refresh my state. And this time, let's take a look at what happens. I can click on task and mark them as completed. And when I re-click on them, they are back to normal. All right, so that's all I had planned for the live coding part of the workshop. I hope you all enjoyed it. And again, I have a repo here that is available for this plugin's code that I will make sure to share with you. And I'm available right now if you have any questions about the code. And if not, then I'll pass the mic back to Raf.
All right. Thank you so much, Rémi. I can't believe you were able to get all done in less than an hour. That's pretty amazing. I guess you were helped a lot by the design system. It's cool to see it in action.
And by code snippets.
Yeah, code snippets for the win, for sure. Yeah, there are a few technical questions. Maybe I'll quickly do an overview of what's next. I mean, at this point, like, you have this amazing plugin. I'm sure a lot of you all want to use it now. So how do you actually submit it to the marketplace so that's available for everyone? That's the last part of this presentation, and it's going to be short. So a few weeks back, you may have known, you may have noticed we published the marketplace, Strappy Market, in the web. And so now you have all these plugins. I think we are over 40 plugins at this point. So that's just the beginning, and there are already some amazing plugins out there. The team is currently reviewing them manually, so it takes some time. So you'll start to see more and more of them with the verified badge, this green check mark here. So that means that it went through a full-on process. And the other cool thing is that yesterday we announced the same content, but now directly in the app. So it means that you can find and install a plugin in a few seconds. So that's pretty exciting. And you have all the same features of like searching, the verified badges here. You even have like official plugins from Strappy mentioned with the Strappy logo next to the name. So a lot is happening, and you see also that there is a submit your plugin on the top right corner. And so that's what we're gonna talk about for a few seconds. So basically, in order to get your plugin on the marketplace and then verified, we ask you to follow some guidelines on the tech side, business, and design. And so we document everything on this link. So I invite you, we didn't do it this time because I figure we kind of know the guidelines, but before starting a plugin, just have a look to see if it actually works, what you're planning to do. And then the submission form is very simple. You just need to share your package on NPM and then provide the link. And then we ask for some kind of illustration. If you need help with that, we're more than happy to help you with some kind of placeholder. No worries, but at least there is like a visual element to your plugin on the marketplace. And just to wrap up on the process, usually once you submit your plugin, it's going to take 1 or 2 days for us to review just the basics so that we feel confident that in terms of security, for instance, your plugin is safe for the community. So we'll display it on the marketplace. And then it's going to take a little bit longer depending on the feedback there is to actually get the verified badge. We really take that very seriously. And so we want to make sure that the experience for users is the best. And so we'll really look at the code and then the design to make sure that the patterns and everything is following kind of our philosophy, and that Strappy doesn't start to look like a Frankenstein, but instead it's like this seamless extension of the core application. So we covered a lot today. We looked at the Strappy design system, how it can help us. There is like the UI kit that you can find on Figma to get started right away if you're a little bit familiar with Figma. Then there is the Storybook where you can find also a lot of documentation on each component composing the design system. And then with Rémi, we looked at the server API, the admin API, the plugin generator, and now we just had a look at the Strappy market. So I hope you feel empowered to build your plugin or to contribute to an existing plugin so that we can really make sure that Strappy covers more and more use cases and is able to provide value to all the amazing things you are trying to do with Strappy and for your business. All right, thank you so much. And now if you have questions, we'll answer the ones that were already asked. And if you have new ones, we'll keep the mic open for half an hour. Thank you so much. Rémi, do you want to look at the technical questions? I'll have a look at the less technical questions.
Yeah, sure. So there was one question about, well, there were several questions actually about the Content Manager API that I decided to use for this demo. So first of all, as Mark actually already replied in the chat, yes, when you use the Content Manager API to run some CRUD operations, like for example, if you make some CRUD operations on like article content type, like all of the lifecycle functions that you have set up for this content type should be run. So this should run successfully. But there was also another question about the Content Manager API, which is whether it was possible to modify its behavior, like for example, to customize the controllers of the API that we're using. And for this, I will have to answer no, because the Content Manager, like in the first place, the Content Manager API is only meant to be used by the Content Manager. So if you have any custom needs regarding your content types, then you should definitely create your own API routes, like in the server part of your plugin. But in my case, I decided not to use it because it allowed me to move quicker for the sake of this demo. But yeah, definitely if you don't have full control over the API routes that you're calling, then you can definitely create your own. Did you spot any other questions, Raf?
Yeah, I can answer one about the injection zones we currently support. So there is the one you saw in the sidebar, and then on the same screen next to the save button, you can also inject more buttons. We still need to document all of these because we're just getting started. I mean, they're available, but we need to document them and provide some guidelines to make sure that we don't break too much the interface. So that's for the edit view. And then on the list view of the content manager, where there's like the list of all the entries, you can add some icons for each row. Like right now, there is an edit and a delete icon, and you can add more if you want to. And then there is a small injection zone on the top right corner of the list where, for instance, for the internationalization plugin, we have a dropdown to select the language. So there you can inject some other elements. Obviously, when we review the plugins, we also look at how plugins might kind of conflict with each other. So that's also why we put some guidelines, is just to make sure that the quality of each plugin kind of stay consistent. Are there other questions, Rémi, on the technical side?
Yeah, I'm noticing a question from like 20 minutes ago from Max, which is, if you are the admin user instead of the end user, how would you get a token? And I think this is referring when I showed the Axios instance function, where it was able to pass a JSON web token to every request. And I want to clarify that the token that is passed to every request using this is the token of an admin user already. Because when you actually sign in on Strapi, like on the Strapi admin panel, like the authentication system will give you a JSON web token. And this is the one that is being used here. Because everything we did here was only available to Strapi admin users and not to Strapi end users. So I just wanted to clarify this. And if we actually wanted to make the to-dos available to end users, then we wouldn't have used the Content Manager API, because this is a restricted and private API. But instead, we would have created our own API route, and this would have let us like have fully custom access control so that it could have been available publicly.
I can take one question. There was one question about the roadmap. And so there is this new tool we started using to kind of gather the requests, the feedback from the community. And so it's called Canny, and you can look at the roadmap, and we kind of adapt the roadmap based on the number of requests. So feel free to thumbs up all the initiatives you think are important, including custom fields. You mentioned that. So have a look, and also you can request plugins. So if you don't feel like confident right now, you don't have time to build plugins, you can always request them, and plugin developers can also look at some ideas of plugins that are highly requested by the community. So that's kind of a nice way there to help each other.
And okay, I spotted another question, but I lost it. So just give me a second. Oh yeah, there was a question from Stefan asking, can we inject content everywhere in the admin outside of predefined injection zones? For example, in the left columns. And the answer here is yes and no, because you cannot inject components anywhere in the admin panel. Like the main entry points that we want to recommend is the injection zones, and that's why we make it easy for them. But here, the example that you mentioned, which is the left column, is actually available as well. I'm going to share my screen quickly again to showcase it. Because here, if you go into the entry point of your plugins admin panel, which is where we were able to register like this content manager component, this injection zone, you can see that in the register phase, we have also a method that is called add menu link. And this is how you're able to add items to the left navigation menu. So to this navigation menu. And so when you, and that's actually what happened here. We have, by default, the generator creates a new item, a new link in this side panel. So that's what you can use to hook into the sidebar of your application. And so I'll have to remember to remove it from the code because, well, in our case, for this to-do component, we have no plans for an item in the left bar. But that's how you would implement it if you wanted.
Also, something I forgot to mention during the presentation is that we try to be very active on Discord, especially on the V4 plugin channel. And so if you have questions, if you have ideas, feedback, feel free to share them there too. I try to read them regularly. Looks like things are clear for everyone. A lot of good questions for sure, and documentation was also like a topic that came up a few times. We are aware that there are some gaps, and we'll make sure to add more information so that it's easier and easier for you to customize Strappy and build plugins for sure. Thanks, Rémi, for the link of the GitHub repo.
Yeah, it's very much a work in progress. Well, as you could see, for example, like just earlier, I noticed that there was a sidebar item that I didn't want, but we actually plan on like finalizing the implementation of this to-do plugin. So it's not clear yet how we will publish it, but it will be published in the coming weeks on the marketplace. We're not sure yet if it's going to be an official plugin or if it's going to be a community one, but hey, if you were excited about having a to-do list in Strapi, then it should happen pretty soon.
For sure. Yeah, and if you want to maintain or to contribute to the plugin, I got plenty of ideas to make this to-do list even better. So yeah, let's collaborate.
And we've got a hiring questions. Well, yes, we are definitely hiring at Strapi, including junior developers. Definitely, we have a lot of positions open. And for that, you can check out strappy.io/jobs, I believe. I'm going to make sure that's strappy.io/careers. So yeah, feel free to apply. It will be very appreciated.
Mm-hmm. Always looking for motivated folks, for sure. Oh, usually we answer within 24 or 48 hours, so yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, if it's been a while since you applied and you got no answer, well, it's odd, but feel free to follow up, I guess. It could be a mistake.
Yeah. And there's another question about the marketplace. For sure, right now, the fact to copy paste the install comment is not the best. We wanted to make sure that you actually had the Strapi Market in the app right away. There are some technicalities of having this one-click button to install plugins, but we're working on it. Yeah, it's coming.
And about this, like one of the things that is a bit complicated is that some plugins require rebuilding your Strapi application. So the ones that have like some front end inside of the plugin, they require a rebuild so that the front end parts are visible, and some others don't. So that's one of the things that is making it a bit hard for us, but yeah, it's definitely possible.
Monetization, yeah, big topic for sure. That's yeah, we plan to have some kind of monetization so that the community can also benefit from all the value that they add to the ecosystem. It's not coming soon, probably not this year. At this point, we tried really to have strong foundations for plugins, and then at a later stage, we add that layer to have financial incentives. And that brings another question or mention about some programs to incentivize plugin developers to create plugins to maintain them. That's also something that we're looking at. And so probably the marketing team will work on some initiatives about that. There is going to be a hackathon at some point very soon, so there might be some more details about that. But yeah, that's something we're looking into. And so if you see other models that are working well for other platforms, feel free to share. We're definitely eager for this kind of insights.
And I noticed a question from David a few minutes ago about how we could customize a GraphQL endpoint, so using the GraphQL plugin in Strapi. And yes, this is possible. You can create your own GraphQL routes, just like you can create your own REST API routes in Strapi. And so I just sent in the chat the link to the relevant documentation, which shows you how you can extend the GraphQL schema by passing it your own like type definitions, resolvers, etc. And just after that, I had another question from Thomas about how we could change the port on WatchAdmin. It's definitely possible. I'm not sure right now, but I'll try to. Yeah, maybe of an environment variable. It's also possible that it may be in a configuration file. I'll try to look into the docs and send you the link if I find it.
A few folks already left, and I want to make sure to thank you everyone for joining us today. It's really cool. A lot of good questions, and if you want to stay, please feel free. But if you need to leave, also just wanted to thank you again for being here with us.
And yeah, thanks again for joining the presentation. Just noticed we have a new question from Arthur. What is the cleanest way to auto-generate values when a content is saved? Like for example, when we save an entry to auto-generate an excerpt, so like a preview, for example, of a long paragraph. And I believe for that, I believe the best solution would be to customize the controller. So you can extend the default controller, but then like modify one field from the object that you're about to return from that controller. And then to actually make the modification, you can either do it right inside of the controller, or you can create your own service and call that service from the controller.
All right. Is there one last question maybe we can answer? In any case, again, we're on Discord if you think of other topics.
Maybe there's one for you actually, Raf. Question from Santiago at 7:15, which is about how plugins who could have some configuration without using the config/plugins.js file.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, good catch. I saw the .js and I was like, yeah, that's a tech question, so I'm gonna leave it for Rémi. So yeah, that's a good question. We would like to kind of install some patterns for the settings, and ideally for each plugin that needs one, there would be actually for each plugin there should be like some kind of settings, and potentially later on that will be the place where you can install or update a plugin. And if you need to enter some APIs or whatnot, you could do it directly there. So there is a community file on Figma again, where you can see a lot of examples of plugins, and I also try to some explorations, and you can see kind of what's the direction. So if you're interested in the topic, I'll try to find now the file so that you can have a look too. There it is.
All right.
Yeah. So it's a wrap.
Yeah, I see no further questions, so
yeah,
I assume we can wrap it up.
Yeah. I don't know what time it is for you all, but here it's about time to go dinner. So I'm good, and yeah, again, thank you so much. Weren't expecting so many people. That's pretty cool. A lot of very interesting questions. And yeah, we're really big on plugins. So if you have ideas or comment questions, we're here for you. We want to make sure that that's the best experience you can have with Strapi. So thanks again.
Yeah, and since this is pretty much the end of StrappyConf, we all hope you enjoyed the conference. And we know that it's not ideal that all the workshops took place at the same time, but all the replays will be available in a few days on YouTube. So I hope you'll be able to watch everything else as well, if you're interested.
And they picked the best one, so it's fine.
Yeah, good choice.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, and there's going to be a video, record of this one as well if you want to rewatch it. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right, I'm going to close the room now. But thanks again, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, and thank you, Rémi. See you all.